Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions during the presentation, you may type them into the chat box or the question box in the bottom right-hand side of the control panel, and we will be sure to answer them following the presentations today. Our webinar today is scheduled to take approximately 2 hours. A detailed schedule will be posted in the chat. If we run out of time to answer questions after each presentation, we will ask our presenters to follow up with you after the webinar. A link to the recorded webinar will be sent out to registered participants and will be posted to our website, saskatchewan.ca/agriculture, within 24 hours following the live presentation. At the end of this session, you will be prompted to complete a short survey. Your feedback is important in planning future events. I will now turn the webinar over to your facilitator for this session.
All right, thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to session 4 of Branch Management Forum 2023. This one's on marketing options and attributes. Show me the money. My name is Adrienne Good, and I am a livestock and meat extension specialist with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture, based out of Moose Jaw, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. First presenter of this webinar is Kathy Larson. Kathy is a research associate in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at the University of Saskatchewan. She completed both her undergrad and master's degree in agricultural economics at the University of Saskatchewan. Prior to joining the U of S in 2018, she was the beef economist for the Western Beef Development Center for 8 years. Originally from a beef and grain farm near Francis, southeastern Saskatchewan, Kathy now calls herself her home. The time of the current webinar or the presenter, so go ahead, Kathy.
All right, thank you, Adrienne. I look for a thumbs up from you that you can hear me okay. Right on, perfect. And we'll get started. You can see my slides, everything is showing up as needed. Excellent, okay. Glad to be here today with everyone talking about some recent return and cost realities using some data from the Canadian Cost of Production Network and then research that a graduate student of mine completed. Her name's Jose Monvoisin, and it looks at auction mart results from Western Canada from 2016 to 2020. So let's get started. First off, something that's near and dear to my heart is cost of production analysis, and oftentimes I feel like a broken record, so I was really pleased to see that there's a study, a paper report put out by the Farm Management Council of Canada, and they analyzed over 600 farms across Canada, different farm types, beef, grain, supply managed, and they were looking for features or practices that were common amongst the financially successful farms. And if you can see here on this list of 7 common practices, number 5 is cost of production. And so with that, I just say that I do talk lots about the importance of cost of production, and it is seeming to be a practice that's commonly used amongst financially successful farms. So a little over 50% of the farms identified as financially successful were using cost of production analysis from this report called the Dollars and Cents Report. So let's move into a little bit on how does one even calculate cost of production. It kind of depends on the methodology or approach, but there's some very high level of things that we do common across any type of analysis. And first, I want to just maybe start off with some terminology that you might hear used or by myself or others in your readings and learnings about cost of production. So first off, oftentimes we do cost of production analysis as on an enterprise basis rather than a whole farm basis. So what I mean by that is instead of looking at all your costs and returns for your whole farm, we break it out by enterprise or profit center. So as a cow-calf producer, you may in fact also raise backgrounders or keep back calves to grass, make your own hay, have your own grazing, and therefore you would actually have the ability to do cost of production analysis for each of those components. So each of those enterprises. So what I'm going to be presenting today is going to be cost of production analysis for the cow-calf enterprise specifically. And when we do cost of production analysis, we are looking at economic profit. So what do I mean by that? I think normally we think of accounting profit as just our monies that come in, our revenues, and then we take off cash expenses and our depreciation for capital cost allowance. That's accounting profit. Economic profit goes a little bit further and calculates depreciation slightly different than what we would do for tax purposes. So we're taking our cash expenses, deducting our depreciation, and we're also taking off something called opportunity costs. And so that gets us to economic profit. An opportunity cost, if you've heard that word before, essentially one of the big components of it is just putting a value for your labor, for your time and effort of yourself and your family members on your operation. And then also the fact that you have money tied up in, say, land and other capital assets, your building and your equipment, so that you've chosen to use your money and your time in those ways. There is a cost for doing that, and so we build in a bit of that within our analysis. So essentially, if you end up with an economic profit of 0, that is not a bad thing. That means you're able to cover your cash costs, put away money for when you need to replenish your assets through taking off a bit of depreciation every year, and you're able to pay yourself and generate a decent return on your land and capital that you have invested in your assets. So something to keep in mind. There's usually 2 different types of expenses. There's variable and fixed. So variable are those that only happen when you are actually producing cattle, for example. So you can think of your big ones, your feed, your vet med, your fuel, repairs, production insurance, marketing deductions. If you didn't raise cattle, then those expenses shouldn't really be there. You shouldn't be, you would have, those expenses wouldn't exist. So that's what we mean by variable. They also go by other names like operating and direct expenses. And then on the fixed side, the fixed expenses, they go by a few different names as well: overhead, capital, indirect expenses. So they include depreciation, loan, interest, property taxes, non-production insurance like fire insurance, or just general building insurance that you would get for your home and yard buildings. These expenses, lots of times they end up being divided over all your enterprises, and because they're often fixed, the more cows you have, the more then you can spread them across more animals, and then you can have benefits that we call economies of size or scale. When we do cost of production analysis for the cost of production network that I'm going to share with you today, we don't do those capital cost allowances that you might be familiar with for like class 10 equipment. What we're using is we take the value of your equipment and we charge 10% of that as depreciation on any equipment. On your buildings, we ask for your value on the buildings, and we charge 5% as depreciation on those. So that's how depreciation is calculated within the cost of production network. All right. And when we collect data through the cost of production network, we're usually gathering producers in a roundtable situation on a setting like this here today through Zoom, actually. And we provide them with a checklist document that's, I think, about 20 pages long, so it might seem a bit daunting, but we're asking a bunch of questions on their production and their financial details. And we go in a roundtable, everybody's taking turns sharing data. And you can see it's a large amounts of questions that we're asking, everything from the breed composition of the herd down to winter feedstuff amounts. What is your yields on your swath grazing or your silage? What is your conception rate, your death loss, things like that? And then on the financial side, you can see a pretty detailed list here. I'm not going to spend much time, but it's everything from what you're getting for your sales amounts for your cull breeding stock and your calves, all the way through to all your various variable and fixed expenses and details on your loans as well. So a lot of data gathering to generate a cost of production benchmark. There's a few different methodologies or efforts that are used for cost of production analysis, and they have fairly similar methods, but there are some slight differences. So the first one listed there, agri-profits, that's by Alberta Agriculture. They've been doing agri-profits analysis for a few decades now. I'm thinking it's approaching 30 years. And so they do, they have a process for crop production and beef cattle production, and it all follows this agri-profits method that they've developed. And we, for a time at Western Beef, use cow profits, which is simply a more pared down version that's specific just for cow-calf operations. We said at Western Beef, that's where the data was managed when I collected it for the provincial cost of production network. Then you'll see ranching for profit. There's lots of training courses for ranching for profit. Maybe some of you on the line here today have attended a ranching for profit course. Its focuses a lot on gross margin analysis. And then lastly, agri-benchmark. So that's the one that's has been adopted by CanFax for the National Cost of Production Network. It was developed out of Texas A&M, and it's used by a number of countries around the world. So everybody's following the same method, then it makes it easier to compare cost of production between different countries. And that comes in handy for a country like Canada, where we export. We're very export reliant for our beef production, so it helps to know how competitive we are with other countries that we compete for market access. Lots of times cost of production is presented as dollars per cow wintered, and I will be sharing numbers like that here today. But it's also useful to think about taking those costs and dividing it by the total pounds of calf weaned. So it's adding up all your wean weight and dividing it, and that's called your unit cost of production. I mean, truly, you do sell some cull cows, but primarily you're selling wean calves. So it's useful to see what you need to perhaps bring for those calves when you're marketing based on what your costs are to cover your economic costs. So a little bit about that cost of production network. I am the provincial coordinator. There are coordinators or people in every single province and region across this country working with CanFax's team, Brenna Grant, Hoiting, and Robin in Calgary. If you want to navigate and find out more, you're going to see a QR code in the top corner of the slide here. If you hover over that with your smartphone's camera, you should navigate to the site for the network to find out more details with fact sheets and results. But essentially, it's our first time ever to do something in a cross-Canadian effort where we're all following the same methodology, that agri-benchmark methodology that I just talked about a moment ago. And we are collecting data from producers. So the actual production and financial data I showed a couple slides ago, we are collecting data every 5 years. So we set people down, producers down in Zoom sessions, ask them for all that data to generate a typical farm benchmark. So essentially we have sign-up surveys, and producers share a bit about their operations, and we look for similarities in the winter feeding type, when you're calving, when you're weaning, do you retain calves, what are your other enterprises. We try and put you in a group with 3 to 6, 2 to 5, I guess, it's 3 to 6 operations in each focus group, where you go and share that data, and from that we generate that typical farm benchmark. So to date, we've met with over 180 operations, and we've generated 45 benchmarks. I think it's actually 46, but we just finished collection again here in the last couple weeks, so these numbers will increase again. But as of last year, we have 45 benchmarks. And I'm going to share some results here in a second. So this is different than, say, what I would have done with Western Beef, where I was meeting with, say, 20 to 30 operations. I'd gather all their data using cow profits, and I would have one benchmark for the province of Saskatchewan. With agri-benchmark, I actually have 10 benchmarks so far for Saskatchewan. So it's essentially a benchmark per production system, because we know there's lots of differences in how operations, when they calve, their land base, how they feed in the winter, where they are in terms of, are they a startup or a medium or a mature operation. There's lots of differences, and we're trying to capture that by having multiple benchmarks called typical farm benchmarks. Okay, again, if you're not comfortable with the QR code at the bottom of the slide, is where you would navigate to find the information on CanFax's website. All right, so let's get into the results. So what you're seeing here is every single column represents one of those 45, 46 farms. And you would just read it. If you look at the bottom, I've tried to put an orange rectangle, rounded rectangle for where the Saskatchewan farms are particularly. So CA just stands for Canada. Then you have Sask and 1A, and you can see it's 1A through 9. That's 10 typical farms for Saskatchewan alone. but there's 45 columns showing here. Each single column essentially is showing you what their total production costs are for 2021. So we have cash costs in yellow, dark green is the depreciation, right? That 10% on the equipment, 5% on the buildings, and then the opportunity costs, the unpaid labor, the value of what your money could have earned elsewhere rather than being tied up in land and equipment. So that's the light green part. And so you can see each of the different farms has different total production costs. And then you see a little black rectangle. That's the revenue. So each black rectangle is the revenue. What is it adding in there? Well, it's going to be the cull breeding stock revenues, the wean calves, and then particularly for Saskatchewan, there was that drought payment. We've included 100 of the $200 that was put out by government payments is included in this revenue. Where that little black triangle shows up on the pillar gives you an indication as to whether how that farm's doing in terms of covering its cash costs, its depreciation, and its opportunity costs. So let's give you an example here. Farm 8A, its triangle is above its pillar of cost, so it is generating a positive economic profit, versus say someone like Sask 5A, its triangle isn't even above the cash cost. So for an operation like this, they're not generating enough revenue to cover their cash costs. So they're going to either have to bring in revenue from other parts of their operation, so other enterprises, or they're going to have an off-farm job or something to make ends meet. Okay, so lots of variation going on. The average was $5.19 per cow, and this is particular for 2021, a very rough year because we had lots of drought afflicting the operations, causing higher than typical feed costs. Average cash costs were $9.25, depreciation $162, and opportunity costs $432. All right, so amongst these farms, 80% of them were able to cover their cash costs. 61% covered cash plus depreciation, and 13% covered cash, depreciation, and opportunity costs. So those are the ones that were able to not only cover their cash and depreciation, but earn themselves, pay themselves a fair wage through unpaid labor valuation, and generate some return on their money tied up in their assets, their land and equipment and buildings. This graph just shows cash costs per cow by winter feeding type. So a few different winter feeding types. Annuals be your swath grazing, corn grazing, annuals plus hay. So if you did a bit of swath grazing and then had to switch to a hay diet. Hay, as you can see, is the most common amongst all the farms, the most pillars there, and silage and hay, and then a silage-based diet over here. Average cash costs were $9.25. That's what this black line is showing, and just showing that there are farms that fall below that average for every single winter feeding method. The whole point of this slide is just to say, as the title says, you can be a low or high cost operation with any winter feeding stuff. I mean, it's important to be managing those diets and doing your feed testing and figuring out what you're putting in front of your cattle. But it's not like you can pick one feed stuff and think that that's going to be the fixer, the silver bullet to becoming low cost. You can be low cost with any winter feeding stuff, is what this chart tells us. So as I had mentioned already, 2021 with the drought, we just had extraordinary circumstances that producers were facing, such as yourselves. And what we found between the two comparison years, 2020 and 2021, we had increases in cash costs, but very little change in depreciation and opportunity. If we look down here, cash costs increased 17% between the 2 years. Depreciation and opportunity stayed fairly straight or fairly level. It just means that there wasn't many changes in labor or asset changes. But we do see changes in total costs were up 12% between the 2 years. Unfortunately, even though costs went up 12%, we see revenues only increased 2%. So that gets to that whole point that we saw fewer operations covering all of their ability to cover their cash costs and their total production costs. So total costs up 12%, but revenues only up 2%. What's some of the explanation behind that? Well, CAF returns, we do have different operations between the 2 years that we're looking at. We've been collecting data from producers over the last 3 years. So we have a larger data set between 2020 and 2021. But amongst those, the returns, we did see lower prices and lower weights emerging for those that we analyzed. So let's shift gears a bit and just focus on what do we see as common features among profitable farms. So what we ended up, what CanFax ended up doing is taking all the farms and ranking them, ordering them from lowest profit to highest profit for both medium term and short term. So medium term's on the left. What does medium term profit mean? If you can see down at the bottom of below the figure, it means medium term profit means we're looking at the farm's ability to cover both their cash costs and their depreciation. And short term on the right, it just means are they able to cover those cash costs with their revenues that they're receiving. And there's an overlay here to splitting these 46 herds into thirds, so low, medium, and high. So we had 61% able to cover their medium-term costs and 80% able to cover their cash costs. So what we did is after we've sorted out these herds into these groups, we're looking for the features of what makes this group different from the other two. Is there anything that makes them stand out between the low and the medium profit groups? See the key differences showing here on this table between the low, medium, and high. We didn't see much difference in calf death mortality. Calf mortality is fairly consistent across the groups. We didn't see much difference in weaning rate. It's fairly consistent numbers across the group. Weaning weights were actually lower for the high profit group. And you'll see where that comes about as we come down a little bit lower in the slide. When you adjust them to a 205-day weight or look on the basis of weaning weight as a percentage of dam weight, we see that it's pretty consistent across the group, 41, nearly 41 and just over 41%. Where we do see the big differences is on herd size. So the high profit farms had an average of 308 females. This comes back to my point that I made at the start. When you have some of these fixed costs that are always there, regardless of whether or not you're producing, if you have more cows to divide that cost across, you're going to decrease your per cow costs, and therefore that brings that economies of size or scale and helps you have a lower cost per individual cow. And then also there is differences. The high profit groups had lower weight cows. So a lower weight cow consumes less, has less feed costs, and the like. If we look a little bit more, just taking that herd size difference, so the point on this slide, more cows equals more profit, we've essentially taken all those medium profits per cow and just rank them from lowest to highest by herd numbers, so number of cows. So herds under 100 cows, only 47% were able to cover their medium term costs, their cash costs and depreciation. Between 100 and 200 cows, not much difference, but a little bit of an improvement. 50% were covering their cash and depreciation costs. Then we see a big jump once we start going to 200 plus cows. This group, 89% was covering their medium term costs, that's cash and depreciation. And then above 300, a little bit of a slip back there, but still 75% able to cover those medium term costs. Okay, so more cows able to spread those fixed costs over more animals and bring down your depreciation costs on a per cow basis. And the smaller cows, so just looking at the differences here, Across all the farms, low, medium, high profit, the high profit cows, those high profit herds had 47-pound lighter cows. If we look amongst herds where there's less than 100 cows, it's even greater difference in weight. They're nearly 80-pound smaller cows. And if you're just looking at the herds with over 100 cows, we're at 20 pounds. Okay, so the lighter cows, they will consume less feed and less grass, and therefore can reduce some of your biggest costs, which is feed. In terms of land, labor, and capital differences between these low, medium, and high profit groups, so the labor costs were 53% lower for the medium profit group. They climb back up a little bit for the high profit, but we do see a major labor cost difference between the low profit herds and the other two groups. Land costs are, fairly flat amongst the groups, across the groups, and then again, capital costs are down 39% between the from the low to the high profit groups. One thing I'll note, the unpaid labor comments, you saw such a big difference on that previous slide, right? We go from here down to here. What's going on? How is unpaid labor captured in this analysis? So we are asking producers to share how many hours they and their family members are putting into the operation. And they can give total hours, and then we ask them to break it out by enterprise, how many hours are spent haying with the livestock. And the range amongst the 10 Sask typical farms was everything from 600 to 5,000 hours. So this excludes paid labor. This is only unpaid labor. Sometimes some of these operations do have paid labor as well. So that works out to about 2,300 hours per operation. If you want to use that, do a bit of a comparison, a typical full-time job will be 40 hours a week times 52 weeks a year, so just under 2,100 hours per year. And we also ask the producers to provide a value for their labor. So essentially, what would they need to pay someone to come in and do their role? And the range that was offered or provided is $20 to $25 per hour amongst these producers. And so when that works out to, okay, what you tell for your hours and what you think you would reasonably need to pay or what you could earn doing this job for someone else, it works out to anywhere from $230 to $620 per cow. So when you have a smaller herd, but you put in lots of hours, moving fences or observing them, or you spend a lot of time feeding, the way that you feed, how you're tracking that ends up being quite costly opportunity costs. Remember, that's part of our economic profit analysis. But I guess the point I would make here is that we do want to track unpaid labor, but I do find that oftentimes producers struggle with tracking how much time they commit to their operations or use in various ways with accuracy. Some have processes and they're really keeping track of it, but a lot of producers do struggle. Okay, let's move into revenue sources. So across the 10 operations from Saskatchewan, that's what you're seeing. Every column showing here is just the Saskatchewan operations. I put their herd cow size right below, so you can see how many cows each of them has. That's the green number under each one. So we have everywhere from 85 to 950 cows. So a wide range of differences, but some commonalities in terms of where their revenue comes from for their cow-calf enterprise. So all of them, as I said before, we included 100 of the $200 drought payment that was issued by the province of Saskatchewan in 2021. So that's the black column here, that's that $100. Everybody had that per cow. And then we have culls as the yellow section. It ranges depending, from 7 to 21% of their total revenues comes from selling cull breeding stock. The bulk of the revenue for all the operations comes from selling weaned calves. And then this one particular operation, you can see there's dark green here. It says breeding stock. So they're the only typical farm that we had in Saskatchewan that sold bred heifers, and it was contributing 31% of their cow-calf enterprise revenues. So something to note there, why there's this difference with that group. So just main point I'd like to make is 70 to 85% of the cow-calf revenues are coming from the sale of wean calves. So now I want to take my comments to talking a little bit more about that. So given that there's so much of your revenues coming from the sale of wean calves, it's important to think of maybe what you can do to make sure you're getting the best price for your calves. So I'm going to share some research from Jose Monvoisin over the last tail bit of my presentation today. So just from that previous chart, about 15% from cull breeding stock. And again, in 2021, there was that revenue payment. So there was $200, but in our analysis, we only put half of the payment in, $100 per cow. As you saw, there was only the one operation that was selling bred heifers, Saskatchewan A. 50% of the operations there, 10 different typical farms, kept back their calves to background and then grass and sell as long yearlings. And 40% of them, 4 of the 10, had mixed farm operations. What I mean by that is they do derive part of their whole farm revenue, so their overall revenue for their operation, from the sale of cash crops. All right, so let's go into Jose's study for her analysis. We do know from producer surveys that we've conducted, such as the Western Canadian Cow-Calf Survey from 2017, that marketing calves via your local direct local auction is the most common way that calves are marketed. But we see interest in other options, and especially I noted through conversations with producers in the cost of production network, there was use of different methods. So online auction selling through Team or Sale or DLMS, and direct sale. Some of the producers are, bypassing auctions altogether and finding out who's bought their calves in the past and building relationships to sell direct to that previous buyer if that works. And sometimes they'll come back to the auction system. So every year, it's not always a consistent approach, but there are a few different ways you can market your calves. So what did Jose do? So she was given access to sales data from a 5-year period. So she's looking at sales data from 2016 to 2020. And there was a little over 500,000 head of cattle marketed across about 5,000 lots. There's 3,300 steer lots and a little over 1,600 heifer lots. And she was specifically wanting to see the value for 17 different attributes, some of them very traditional attributes like the weight of the calves, how many calves or the lot size, what the future outlook for fed cattle was based on what the price was through the livestock price insurance program, and the days to delivery from the sale date to what the delivery date was in the listing for the calves. There was visual attributes she included, so the color or breed, the weight uniformity of the calves, and then there's attributes that we say in the economics world called credence attributes, where it's something that pertains to these calves, but you can't visually confirm it, like age verification or VBP plus. The operation is part of VBP. The calves are eligible to be marketed to the EU because they've never been implanted or received antibiotics. Things like that, or their implant status, they haven't been implanted. You can't visually validate whether or not that's so that we call those credence attributes. So she was specifically taking data from August through December sales and lots from Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. Most of the lots that she analyzed were from Team, but you'll see they were representative from a few different auction platforms. She was only looking at lots where the calves had a base weight or average weight of 400 to 800 pounds. There needed to be something that triggered us to know that it was calves. Sometimes DLMS, for example, will name the lot as calves. So you know it's baller calves or recently weaned calves. Sometimes there's a mention of mothers within the lot listing description. So again, she looked at about 5,000 lots of calves to do this analysis. And over the 5 years that she looked at, there was an increase in the number of lots marketed through this online platform over the years. So 29% increase from 2016 to 2020. So it's growing in popularity for sure. In October of 2020, I have a listing here just to give you an idea of what Jose was working with. This is a lot that was marketed October 2nd through Team. And there's information that she would have been picking up: the number of head, the sex, the base weight, the weight uniformity, so the difference between the min and the max weight. We know that these calves were from Alberta. There's information on their color or their breed. They're all red calves. There's information on their frame size. These calves were all considered medium calves. There's information on their body condition, their veterinary work, whether or not they're age verified, implanted, and down here there's information on VBP status and EU certification and their days to delivery. So they were going to be eligible to be picked up 20 days after the sale date. So all this information was typed into a database and then analyzed using a process of linear regressions. So it's an econometric approach used by economists. And I'm going to just give you some highlights of some of the data points or attributes that Jose looked at. So one of them was color. We had hoped to use breed, but the auction companies capture breed and color differently. So we went with color as a proxy for breed. Most of the lots, about 70%, had some mention of Angus somewhere. At least some of the calves had an Angus influence. But we used 4 color categories: black, red, char influence, so tan, white, silver, and then mixed. Mixed would be where all the lots that didn't have at least 80% of these 3 other categories would get slotted. So you can see most of the lots were black, and then the next most common category was mixed. So there's maybe 30% black, 25% red, and the rest Charlet, while there are a bunch of mixed match colors and therefore breeds, and so then it would be classified as a mixed lot. So what we found from the analysis was that the Charlet influenced calves brought the best prices, but there's also the least common. There was only 10% of the lots over the 5 years that were of the steer lots that were fit a Char type of breed description. But they did influence the price in a positive way, as and mixed lots where you have a bunch of different colors and breeds were discounted in 4 of the 5 years. So it's something to take note of. In terms of weight uniformity, the weight spread was 148 pounds from the heaviest to the lowest weight on average. And we created 3 different weight categories based on that spread. So if they were under 100 pounds from the min to the max weight, they were coded as being an even. If it was between 101 and 200 pounds, they were coded as being an uneven weight lot, and then very uneven if it's over 200 pounds. You can see that most of the lots, 2/3 of them, were uneven in that they had a difference of somewhere between 100 and 200 pound spread. Lots that were even, so the price is under, the weight spread is less than 100 pounds, saw a positive influence on the price or positive association with the price. And if you had a very wide spread on your lots, you were penalized on average 4 or 5 years over a little over $2 per hundredweight, or 2 cents a pound. My comment to this is that these findings are similar to what's been found in the US through superior livestock auction analysis. And it goes to the point that it's important to really consider your calving distribution. And there's that long-standing recommendation. The Ministry of Agriculture has done a great job of talking about the importance of getting at least 60% of your cows calving in the first 21 days. If you do things like this, then that really helps to have that uniform group of calves to put together as a marketing package. In terms of implant status, so in the lots, a producer can indicate if the calves are implanted or not implanted, and then there is a fairly large group of lots that don't state either way. It's around 20 to 25% that do not say either way if the calves were or were not implanted. The analysis out of the US through Superior found that by doing that, by not stating, leaving it unknown, there was a price discount. And we found the same. We found that if a lot did not indicate whether or not it had been implanted, there was a price discount up to $2.12 per hundredweight by not stating either way. It's important to include that information in your lot description, or when you're putting together a lot description that you maybe are sharing with potential buyers, regardless of the way that you're marketing. Age verification. So age verification was really important post BSE because we had a lot of markets requiring they had certain age limits on numbers or types of beef that they would import. We did find over the 12 years or the 5 years, there was a decline in the number of lots that mentioned age verification. It decreased 12%, to the point that we even found that the premium by 2020 no longer existed. It was there from 2017 to 2020, but it was decreasing in size to the point that it was no longer significant, so not statistically significant. I would make the comment that age verification is still necessary to receive that retroactive payment through Cargill, through that Certified Sustainable Beef program. So your calves still need to be age verified. It's important to do. Marketing attributes, the VBP mentioned, we found that the number of lots mentioning VBP increased over the 5 years from less than 5% to 15% by 2020 for steers and 13% for heifers. So we saw increasing mention of VBP. Not surprisingly, that's sort of in time with when the Cargill retroactive credit was announced, was around this time frame, 2017-18. And we did see a premium associated with the VBP mention in the last year of analysis in 2020. Just in closing today, I would just like to reiterate that cost of production is considered a top management practice amongst financially successful farms. The Canadian Cost of Production Network will continue to recruit operations. If you want to learn more, or perhaps are interested in maybe being part of the network, there is an honorarium associated with participation, and I can certainly give you more details if you're interested in learning what's all involved and entailed. The two main factors that were found to be influencing profit were herd size and the weight of cows amongst our analysis in the most recent cohort of 46 herds. Feed and labor are the two largest costs. And lastly, wean calves, they contribute a large part of your revenue as a cow-calf producer. And as for that, it's really important to pay attention to your marketing options. So local auction, that's still your really common marketing method for many producers. We're seeing this growing appetite for things like selling online or direct. It's a way to preserve the identity of your animals and perhaps obtain financial reward for your efforts and how you manage. And again, uniformity in breed and weight are seen as providing a positive influence on the price. It's important to disclose your implant status, and VBP was seeing increased bringing about of premiums amongst our analysis over the 5-year period. So all those things brought higher prices. Before I end off, I just want to maybe leave it at this slide and let you have an opportunity. I'll see if I can make sure we get these links shared about this. I have 2 surveys, one on feed testing that's with a number of collaborators across the Western provinces and funding through the Beef Cattle Research Council, and another survey with Obi-Durana from Lakeland on swath grazing. We want producers, there is honorariums associated with these. We're looking for input from producers, whether or not you feed test, whether or not you swath graze. Maybe you've tried swath grazing and you'll never do it again. We want to hear from you. We want to know a little bit more about these practices. Swath grazing, it's a really low cost feeding practice, yet it's very lowly adopted. So we want to know more about why that's the case. And for those that do swath graze, what they're doing. And then on the feed testing side, feed's your biggest cost. There's this recommendation of feed testing, yet we know a lot of producers don't frequently feed test. So whether you feed test or not, tell us what you're doing, and we'll give you an honorarium for doing so. So those surveys are open right now. And with that, thank you. I'm not sure, I'll make sure I can.
Thank you, Kathy. Hopefully my sound is working now. We are ready to take questions. If you have not already done so, you may type your questions now in the question box on the bottom right-hand side of the control panel. And if we do not get to all of the questions at this time, we will ask Kathy to answer them in the chat or follow up via email after the webinar. So we wait for some questions to come in. I do have a couple. Do you know, or you probably do know, are the cow weights actual or estimated in that cost of production?
So it's going to be a combination. So a lot of times what we're asking them for is what the weights, though they are providing weights from their cull, like their sales slips. So we'll capture that as a cull weight, and then we have to ask them. There are producers that are weighing, and then there'll be some that aren't. And so it's going to be a combination of that, Adrian.
Awesome, thank you. Another question is, do you know why there's such a big price increase for the Shar influence calves?
Well, you know, we had some interviews with stakeholders before we got started and said, you know, what attributes should we be looking at and what can we expect? I had thought Angus was going to bring the best price, and we were told early on from the people that we chatted with that Charlet calves would. And the results did find that. I think it's because they finish heavier. I think that's part of it, is just they end up being pretty big finishing weight. And it could be that there's some premium being paid for those animals from Eastern Canadian buyers. That's going to be my guess, but I don't know for sure.
Cool. And then was there a difference between implanted versus not, or just the no status?
Yeah, good question. No, so there was no premium or discount if you implanted or not implanted. It's that there's nothing that was statistically significant that would say, oh, you need to not implant, or so it was more about making sure you have that information shared. And that's similar to what was found through the analysis done by K-State for Superior Livestock Auction as well.
Okay, I'm going to double check the chat. So next question is, by aggregating 5 to 6 producers into a group, is there any information loss that excludes heterogeneity among these producers within a group?
I guess what we're trying to do, so that's a really good question. Love the word heterogeneity. I think that's kind of what why we're doing these focus groups, is we're really trying to pair together operations that are similar enough. I mean, there's always things that you can't, there's not always a perfect match, but if you go into the details, so there'll be, the operations will have to, they all will have a very similar calving time, all similar time of weaning, and then retention afterwards. Like they all will have grassers. Like there's things that need to be common, but then there will always be slight differences. So yes, some of that's lost, but I feel like by doing the multiple benchmarks per province, that we're trying to at least show some of that heterogeneity that's there. That was a great question. I'd love to know who that was.
That was from Minfang Tang. So I don't know if you.
Okay.
I had another question. Back to the cost of production. You had one farm that was selling breeding stock, and those were just bred heifers. Did you have any producers like selling bulls or purebred?
No, we don't. So that's one of the misses right now. So I think that we don't have purebred operations yet, but there was some that we collected data from this most recently, just here in February. So there should be a purebred cost of production benchmark coming up. So that's not to say that there hasn't been producers that have purebred herds participate, but usually they also have commercial. So we kind of end up collecting both commercial, and then we use those commercial numbers in the analysis.
Awesome. So we can look forward to some purebred numbers next year. So the next question is, how many cows did it take to cover all costs, including opportunity cost?
I think that my comment, you end up having a better chance of it once you got over 200 cows. I think that maybe showed through some of that breaking out of the profits, but every single herd size, there's opportunity to, they're so dependent on your cost structure and how much land base you have, and which could be dependent on your productivity of your land. So I can't say that there's necessarily a golden number of cows that you must have, but we do see an increasing chance once you up over 200 cows, but all herd sizes had successes.
Okay, on the cost of production data, did you determine averages by province or just overall?
I do have data that's particular to Saskatchewan. So every province, I mean, nationally, what CanFax does is amalgamating everything nationally, and then they can pull together analysis by province if that's interested. If there's an interest in having it by province, let me know, and I can definitely tailor the data to show that. I generally have stuck with Saskatchewan only, but if there's interest in looking aggregating it by province, I certainly can do that. It just sometimes we don't want to do that because there's such differences between the farm types. That was the whole point of having multiple benchmarks.
Perfect. That was Jen asking, so maybe we are interested. There's another question come in. Did you estimate the temporal valuation of cattle attributes in the econometrics model? It looks like buyers are paying more attention to some attributes year by year. The research is very interesting.
So yes, we did annual models. So over 2016, 2017, because it does change by year. And that's, for example, I'd had in my comments about age verification, where it seemed to have a positive influence on price up until 2020, and then it wasn't statistically significant. So, and then, for example, the verified beef production, it's being mentioned, but it doesn't seem to have a statistically significant influence on price until 2020. So yeah, we did look year over year. And I'm working towards building relationships to continue that analysis. So I think it's important because year over year it does change. So great question.
Yes. All right. Looks like questions have slowed down now. Kathy, will you be on still if something pops into the chat?
Sure. Yeah, I
Or
can.
we can have you email out answers if another one comes in. So thank you for joining us, Kathy. And we are going to move on to our next speaker, Alan Jackson. Alan is going to speak to us about the basics of order buying calves. Alan has worked at JGL since 2004, buying cattle in northern and central Saskatchewan. In recent years, together with their partners at Miller Livestock, they have started an order buying weigh station just west of Saskatoon, where they are able to service hundreds of producers in the ranch direct trade all across Saskatchewan. Alan is also co-owner and operator of a grass cattle operation where his family resides south of Prince Albert. At this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to our presenter. So go ahead, Alan. You can share your presentation.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, yep.
Okay, right on. Thank you guys for having me. I just got done doing the same presentation at the U of S like 10 minutes ago, so I'm warmed up. So thank you, Kathy, for switching time for me as I double booked myself. My apologies. So here to talk today about order buying, cattle buying, and different avenues that can go to go about doing that. It's changed a lot in the last few years since I've been doing it. You know, the first one we'll talk about is a live auction, which is the oldest and the most popular still today. Is that a live auction? You know, the gone are the days of most of the regular sales. Everything's kind of gone to a pre-sort now. And, you know, there's pros and cons to that. The one thing about those regular sales is they took so long and your cattle waited there so long before they got weighed. The pre-sorts, now your cattle are getting weighed quicker. And, you know, sometimes it takes a little longer to get to sale day, which could create some issues. But just to go over some of the pros and cons of what we deal with and what producers deal with at live auctions, you know, some of the positives is the price discovery on a climbing market. especially right now, as most of you I'm sure have noticed, we are in a very bullish market where we seem to be gaining $5 to $10 a hundred, especially on the lighter grass type cattle every week. And oh yeah.
Do you have slides to share?
I don't really. I don't
Okay.
think it's really
Perfect.
necessary. It's pretty
No
bland.
worries. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So as I said, the market right now is on a huge climb, and you know, that's kind of where you find like how high are these things going to go. You need to get some people bidding on them in the front row, and that's kind of given us our price discovery of where this market's going. It is pretty astounding to see right now how much some of these light cattle, how strong they've gotten. You know, at these pre-sorts, they're selling large groups of cattle, and sometimes there's small groups in there. So if you only have 5, 10, 15 head of, let's say, 600-pound steers, you go to a pre-sort and you might be buying 100. They might be sold with a group of 100, 150, which gives you some pretty good marketing power. It garners a lot of interest by the buyers in the front row than just buying groups of 5, 10, 2 all day long. You get a big package of cattle there, and people are pretty they're paying attention to the big groups. So it's nice to get, if you have a small group, to get them in there with the big groups. You got a front row full of bidders, and they're all carrying orders in their pockets, and in a market like this, they're probably making poor decisions, and that's where, you know, you'll see some of the highest cattle where you're talking about on Coffee Row. Holy smokes, did you see what those brought the other day? It's probably at an auction. That being said, you know, there's price discovery works both ways, and when the market's going down, when you're in the glut of the fall run, you're short on trucks, that's kind of where you find the bottom. And you know, when you have your cattle there for sale that day, you're committed. And I know you can pass them out and take them home. I've never seen it. Don't think it would be that feasible, but you know, once they're to town, there's that uncertainty from the time they leave the farm till they get to the auction market. What are they going to bring? And can be a little nerve-wracking. There's commissions that go along with it, and the shrink, which, you know, I talked to the students about here today. You know, the takes a long time for some of those cattle to get weighed at some of these big sales. Standing on concrete for a long time, you're losing pounds, and when your pounds are worth over $3 a pound, it's a lot of money. That being said, you know, the buyers also know when that happens, and they know that the cattle are shrunk out, and that's why they'll bring sometimes more money than something that just got weighed on the farm with 4% shrink, because the condition on the buying side is a lot better. And the biggest one, and you heard about it a lot this year at the live auction, was stress on animals, and a lot of that had to do with truck shortage. I would say that our trucking fleet is probably down 30 to 40% in Saskatchewan. It's alarming. And you know, those cattle get to town, they're sometimes assembled and sorted for 2 days and then sold the following day, and sometimes not getting out that day of the sale. Sometimes it's the next day, or, you know, heaven forbid, 2 days after. And sometimes you hit weather and you can't get trucks up there, and it stresses out those animals, and it's a big turnoff for the buyers. The guys at the feedlots, you know, they'll just say no more. If they get problems and they're having health problems at the feedlot, I'll just cut it right off. And we saw it this year. We had some tough weather. And you know, you bring those calves in off tough weather, wean them, it's a tough time for them. But that's kind of an overview of the live auction. Another big one that's really caught on. I mean, it caught on years ago, but it's a big part of the industry now, is these internet sales. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Team and DLMS. It gives you a lot of exposure. There's a lot of people watching from, you know, all over Canada, really. You got Ontario guys on there, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC. There's a lot of people logged on there, different buyers every week. You have the ability to pass cattle on Team one time, and DLMS one time, no charge. I shouldn't say that. I don't know for sure. I don't know how every one works. But if you put your cattle on there and it's a bad day, bad market day, something like a war breaks out or some disease, and you can just say, hey, not going to sell them today, the market's down, and they're still at home, they're in your pen, and you're no worse for wear. You can try again the next week, you can try again next month. You have that ability, and it is nice knowing that you're in control of your inventory before they leave property. Low stress for the calves, especially for the calves. They're weaned off mama that morning, put on a truck, weighed, sometimes weighed before they're put on a truck, and they're down the road at their next destination. And you can guarantee that the buyer on the other end is probably not going to complain about health or that the cattle look stressed. The condition, weighing condition on those cattle, like less stress, obviously. So that's better condition for the seller. Absolutely, 100%. And you have the ability to forward price cattle on there. I'm sure everyone's seen we're selling fall delivery yearling cattle off the grass for September, October. They're selling them now, and the market's hot. It looks really good. You don't have to wait till September to capitalize on that price. You can do that through those avenues, through one of those internet sales, and that's a big thing. I mean, if you think the market might go down, and a lot can happen between now and September, and you like the price, there's a margin in there for you, lock it up. Some, not going to call them negatives, but things to keep in mind. There's commission that goes on top of that. And if you have small groups of cattle, sometimes if you have some local guys that are wanting them, it can work out pretty good for you. I've seen replacement heifers and bred heifers in small groups trade very well on internet sales. The small groups of feeder cattle, depending where you're placed, if you're really close to an auction market or a buying station where they can fill that truck, it's okay. If you're up in the sticks and you're selling half a load of cattle with what trucks cost nowadays, it's probably not in your best interest to do that, but you never know. But it's something to keep in mind. Another thing they wanted me to talk about today was direct sales. It's become a big part of what we do recently, and here in Saskatoon and in Moose Jaw. And when you're talking direct marketing, this is where the producer, the reins are in your hands, and you need to really do your homework and know the value of your cattle. The information that you need is all around us. We have every sale in Western Canada is real-time, updated price dates, the exact weighted cattle, the quality, color. You can go on Team DLMS and watch the internet sales, and you can go to your local auction barn, and all that information is out there. If you're getting ready to sell cattle this week, you should look at that and know what your cattle are worth. And you call a buyer, they come look at the cattle, you describe the cattle, either or, and you negotiate a price between the two of you. And that's the price. The cattle are moved. There's sometimes little to no charges to the seller. And that's one of the biggest pros. There's very low stress on the animals, low shrink, and you know what you're getting before the cattle go on the truck. And that's huge nowadays. You can basically do the math at your kitchen table and say, hey, am I going to be able to pay bills this year? Is this going to work for our program? Do we need to get them a little heavier? And some pretty good peace of mind there. And if whether you're moving them right off the farm or bringing them to a buying station, the cattle are weighed quickly. For instance, at our place yesterday, we weighed just under 1,000 cattle. Yesterday, they were all sorted and weighed. Half of them went out that night. The rest of them went out this morning. We do that throughout the fall. We operate, 4 or 5 days a week, so we can facilitate that and not get backed up. And we, the buyers on the other end really like the health and condition of the cattle. They're healthy, ready to go. Don't have a bunch of snotty noses, and it's very good for buyer and seller, in my opinion. There's some downsides to it in a market like this. If you call me today and say, hey, what are my calves worth, and you're planning on bringing them next Monday, I'll give you a price based on today's market, and I guarantee you will be hanging a lip on Monday, because this thing's going up every day, every week. So we're trying to tighten that up for pricing. But in a climbing market, when you are doing a private treaty deal and you're going down the road 4 or 5 days before you deliver them, that happens. Now flip that coin. If you get quoted a price today and the market goes down 3 or 4 days from now, not a price quote, but like this is a bid you were given and you did the deal and the cattle are sold and the price goes down, you're still going to get that price, and that's the deal. So that that coin flips both ways. The other thing, you know, when you're dealing direct with an order buyer is just like team, you can do the forward sales. We do a lot of forward contracts, private treaty, and you know, whether it's a month out, 2 months out, 10 months out, and it's become quite common. And there again, just like on the internet sales, you can cash in on a market and still keep your cattle for the time that you want to keep them on. So I was asked to go over some other things today. And also, does anyone have a just question? I don't know if you want to save them to the end or chime in anytime, but the more questions, the better, because it's always fun when people are asking questions. So what are buyers looking for? And that's a question I get asked a lot. And the number one thing is, you know, well, it's neck and neck. It's quality and health is the big thing. We want calves that are vaccinated, that we know come from a program that has a vaccination program. We want calves that are handled properly before they're marketed. When it comes to fresh weaned calves, we want to see those calves in our yard the same day that they are weaned, not 2 days after, not a week after. And like anything after a day they can fall apart. I've gotten lots of phone calls in the past. They're weaned a week, they're weaned 2 weeks. We want to bring them in, and we say, do not bring them in. We do not want them, and they look fine at home. I don't doubt that, but when they come to our place, go through the stress of transit, sorting, weighing, then getting mixed with strange calves, and then shipped to their final destination, they will not look like they did when they left home. It will be a wreck. That is the number one thing, is handling them properly before they come to town. That's what we want to see. You know, as far as different breeds and whatever, I mean, the genetics in Canada have been, I haven't been doing this that long, but in 18 years, the quality of cattle in this country has just multiplied greatly. It's amazing. You know, we don't have, it's pretty easy to be a cattle buyer because most of the cattle are really good right now. We want programs that have good genetics, good reputation, and that all comes with, you know, your vaccines and cattle that are looked after at home. On contracts, they ask, what are we looking for in contracts to contract cattle, to forward contract cattle? You know, the big thing is load lots at a minimum. It's very hard to forward contract. You know, if you have a small group of cattle, I'm not saying it's impossible. It can be done if we can get some other small groups and put them together. But the people that are buying those contracts and wanting to forward contract those cattle usually want to fill a pen, which is, you know, 200 to 300 head, and at least have a liner load of them for contracts. Another question they wanted me to address was how can producers get a premium for their cattle? And I would just revert that answer right back to what we were just talking about: health, vaccine protocol, genetics, and you know, handling them properly before they come to town. I hear a lot of complaints about, you know, people that they do everything right and they don't feel they're getting a premium. And I think that all goes into how you're marketing those cattle. If you are doing everything right and you have a big set of cattle, it doesn't have to be big, but they should probably be sold by themselves or with cattle that have all been handled the same. You know, in some of these pre-sorts, you don't know who's all's calves in there. Sometimes you have a pretty good idea, but if your cattle get mixed with someone who didn't have a vaccine protocol, I mean, we don't know that, but they're just cattle. But if they're cattle that are sold as, you know, so-and-so's operation, you got your brand on there, we know whose they are, we know whose ranch they came from, they come through the ring as one owner group, you are getting a premium. We don't have the pre-conditioned sales. I know they were a thing of the past, and this is the first year that actually in probably 7 or 8 years that you actually got paid to wean and precondition your calves if you kept them over Christmas. And that's just because the market dictated that. The market just kept climbing and climbing, and finally producers that kept their calves got paid to feed them. You know, the problem is with a small group, if they go to town 20 head and they're preconditioned, they're going to go into a, you know, let's say preconditioned, let's call it early December they come, and you got 20 or 50 or even 100 head. Feedlot pens are 200 to 300 head, and that feedlot owner is probably going to vaccinate those calves again because they're going to get mixed with calves that aren't vaccinated. So unless, you know, if you're selling a one owner group of preconditioned calves that fill a pen, or they can be placed with other cattle that do fill a pen, they will bring a premium. But I hear the frustration, and I understand that I get people ask me all the time, should I precondition my calves? And I have two answers to it. Yes, you should. It is the right thing to do, but you're probably not going to get paid for it, unless you have big numbers of it. And I hate to even say that, but it has been the case in the past. There has been some talk of having, you know, VBP sales, and I'm of the opinion, like, that's great. I'm a fan of the program, but as a buyer and as a feeder, what was the vaccine protocol? That's the number one. And until we can have sales where we can sell large groups of preconditioned calves, or, you know, double vaxxed calves, or however you do it, it's hard to pull that premium out of them. The US does a better job of it than us, hands down. You watch their internet sales down there, and I can't even keep track of it. There's cattle, they got 4 or 5 different, you call them labeled, branded cattle, whatever, program cattle. And there's this program, I can't even name them all off, but some of them are carrying 3 or 4 badges on the sale day, and they bring a huge premium. $10, 15, even 20 cents, 100 for some of their program cattle down there. And I don't know what the reason is why we don't have that up here. I hope we do, because it pays spades down there. There's a big fluctuation in price between those program cattle and non-program cattle. Another thing I was asked to talk about was advantages of selling through an order buyer. It's something that, you know, this has grown for us a lot, and me personally as well over the years. You build a lot of relationships, so you're not buying cattle just through the ring. You're dealing with the person every day, making 4 or 5 phone calls a day before the transaction, building relationships. I think that the one feedback I get from the producers is that they have the peace of mind knowing what their cattle bring before they come to town, which they really like. They come in, watch their cattle get weighed, get a check. And I've even had guys from that don't use us, that sell at the local auction barns, that have said, you know, thanks, because we have auction barns coming in right now to our property and guaranteeing us a price on the farm. So it's kind of changed the industry a little bit for the better for the producer. And the producer seems like they're having they got a little more power than they used to marketing their cattle than previous years, and it's nice to see. And it's nice to create another option where before there was only 1 or maybe 2 options selling your cattle. Now there's several more, so it's nice to see. So does anyone have any questions? I hope so, because I burned through that pretty quick, but I hope someone has some questions.
We do have a couple coming in. One of the first ones, what do you think are the first steps to have a better program cattle sales system?
I don't know, because I'm not that familiar with all of the programs in the US. I've always wished the VB program is nice, and I see the VBP sales at some of these auction barns. And I wish that they just carried if they carried a vaccine protocol, and you knew that VBP meant that all those cows were vaccinated, it would be a game changer, in my opinion. As far as, you know, there's the natural brand that hormone free. It just, you know, it looked like it was going to take off big time a few years ago, and now I'm just not seeing it unless there's something on. I don't know. I know there's still some of it going on, but I just wish that we had some kind of branded deal or labeled cattle where those producers are doing everything right, like most are, and they got that premium for it. But when you're mixing cattle that you don't know what their program was at home, it's tough to do. So.
Follow-up is perhaps the reason we cannot capitalize on program cattle in Western Canada a lack of diversity in our packing options, that many feeder calves end up being owned by one of the two packers?
Well, I would disagree with that because the cattle aren't necessarily owned by the packers. When you're a producer selling your calves, you're selling to feedlots, private feedlots, numerous amounts of guys, and they're all saying the same thing. I think they would love it too. I can say personally, last year I bought calves, just bought value, tried to have some calves that were buying out of auction barns, putting them together. Had an awful death loss last year, just due to mycoplasma. No one's fault. It was just stress on the animals. All it was. And this year I'm glad to pay a premium from calves where I know where they're coming from. I know they're vaccinated. Buy them off the farm and open your wallet, because at the end of the day, it's worth the money. I don't agree. We have a lot of issues in our industry with the packer. I completely agree with that. I don't think that's the reason why we don't have these labeled cattle, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to them. They're just killing cattle. It's more the feedlot guys that want it. I think everyone that is on the playing field wants it, but it just hasn't happened.
Okay, little follow-up question on preconditioning. Where do you think the market for preconditioning is heading? Do you think that there will start to be more premiums for it, or?
If more people did it, I hate this question because they haven't brought a premium in so long. Like, to precondition them for 6 to 8 weeks and sell them before Christmas, I haven't seen it. And I think it's probably because there's not enough people doing it. There's not enough. If there was a lot and you could have big preconditioned sales and sell big preconditioned groups, I know they would bring. But here again, I wasn't around for this, but they used to have I think they called them green tag sales, or whatever. They had them in the auction markets. I believe they were all preconditioned calves was the deal, and they quit doing it because they didn't bring a premium. So I don't know, maybe it won't. The short preconditioning usually, I don't believe that it pays a big premium, but some guys do it. They have a reputation. They have a buyer in line, and they know the buyer knows, hey, I'm getting these calves are really good. They're preconditioned, double vax, and they will bring a premium. But it's a tough question for me to answer because I just don't see the value in it right now. But I'm not saying that won't change.
Okay. Totally different question. Is there opportunity, do you think, to further connect cow-calf producers with their carcass data to make better breeding decisions and kind of close the disconnect between calf producers, feeders, and packers?
Well, packers probably aren't going to give it to you. You'd have to get it from the feeder. I remember a few years ago, somebody had a program where you could have part ownership in your cattle, retain some ownership, and they did the marketing for the fat cattle, this and that, and you got your carcass data back. There was also the same program, you could not retain ownership, and you could pay a per head, wouldn't call it a fee, but a price, and get all your carcass data back. Also, I guess if you wanted to finish and feed your own cattle, you could definitely get all your carcass data back. The one thing that it's my opinion solely, is that if you're a producer, your number one job is to create a big, healthy, efficient calf that is appealing to buyers, and let the carcass data be the worry about the guy that's feeding it and getting those animals slaughtered. Some people don't like that answer, but if I am a producer, that's all I care about is I want to create a good product. I want to do everything right. I want my cow herd to be efficient as possible. For me, I want my calves to feed as efficient as possible and graze as efficient as possible for me when I have them. And I want that program to work for me as a producer. And after that, I've done my job, and that's for someone, the feeder. He's worried about the carcass data. And I guess that's my answer there. And I know sometimes it's not a popular one, but I don't know if there's still programs out there where you can get that data back. I've had a couple instances where I've bought some large groups of cattle for feedlots from one producer, and it's kind of been a yearly relationship where that same feedlot gets those producers' cattle every couple 3 years. And sometimes you can get that feeder to hand over some of the data. They're kind of private with it. They don't like to hand it out. If they do really good, I'm of the opinion that they kind of like to keep that to themselves because they want those cattle again, of course, and they'll pay a premium to get them. But they just don't want everyone else knowing how good they were, because then maybe someone else will want it really bad. So I find that they're a little private with that information. So.
Little follow-up to that, would providing carcass data back to cow-calf producers not help in improving our genetics as a whole in the country?
Yes, it would. Don't argue with that at all. And I think a lot of, your purebred bull sales, some of those herds and the feeder cattle from those get fed, they get the carcass data back from them. Yes, you are correct. It would make the genetics better. I'm not saying that getting your carcass data wouldn't make your herd better, but when you're in the business of selling calves, at the end of the day, you just want a big, healthy calf that converts well on the cow and that's appealing to the buyers. But no, that's a very good question, and they're absolutely right. I just don't see a world where the feeders are just like, hey, here's everyone's carcass data back. I don't think that's going to happen. They're going to want you to have some skin in the game and feed them with them or do something. But I think that's the best answer I can give.
Awesome. So Merck has the Prime Vac program. Might that help with premiums for vaccinated and preconditioning calves?
Yes, if we had enough of them, yes. It's it's a start. I guess it's another problem too as well. With all these vax programs, they want the pharmaceutical company's name behind it too, and there's some different companies, so it's not all the same. And I don't know what the answer is to having those program cattle, but yes, any program is good. It's just having enough of them. It's very rare that you see at a sale where there'll be your individual one owner lots where you'll see, yes, here's the program cattle and they're on this and that, but you just don't see the volume that you have, that you need.
Okay, next question is, what is the approximate percentage of producers adopting retained ownership until slaughter in Saskatchewan and Western Canada, and do they get premiums for doing that?
I'd say it's very low. Most of the producers in Saskatchewan are in the business of selling feeder cattle. One thing I'm seeing change a lot is guys keeping their calves and grazing them on pasture and selling them as yearlings. These yearlings have been bringing big money the last few years. The feedlots really like them. As far as retaining ownership to feed, I don't see a lot of it. And if they do, it's usually at a custom lot. They're not doing them themselves. Is there a premium to do it? There sure can be if the market goes your way. I've always said when you sell a calf in the fall, someone's buying it thinking they're going to make money to background it, and then there's someone else that's going to buy it after with the intent to make a profit to feed it. So there's three guys in the middle there that all think they're going to make money, and if you retained ownership all the way through, then you hit 3 home runs. Well, yeah, there's a big premium in it. There's a lot of risk involved too. It's cash flow issues is the biggest hurdle, I would say. It's even a big hurdle to keep those calves and retain them for grass. That's a big cash flow hurdle too. And yeah, so I would just say I would say the percentage would be very low.
Okay, we have another question. Do you think prices we're seeing now, are they going to hold into the fall run, or are they going to fall?
I do, and I have sounded like a broken record for the last 3 years that this thing's got to get better. It's got to get better. The writing's on the wall. And you can listen to any analyst and read any article you want, but the only piece of information that I feel is the big eye opener is we have a saying in this business: we'll run out of money before you run, or we'll run out of money before you run out of cattle, or you run out of pen space. That's the big one. Every single fall, end of November, early December, we run out of places to put feeder cattle. In feedlots in southern Alberta, we're out of room. Every single year. This year, did not happen, and there wasn't big a big sorry, a lot of everyone sold everything this year. The prices were okay. They weren't that good. But guys were like, I'm getting rid of these things, don't want to feed them. A lot of guys were short on feed from drought previous year, getting caught up, and people didn't retain a whole bunch of calves, and they all came to town fast and furious, and we never ran out of pen space. So that is the number one thing. These feeders wanted cattle all the way through. Okay, so you get through fall and didn't run out of pen space. And keep in mind, we did not export a lot of cattle this year. We did some, but it wasn't huge numbers. So then we get into the new year. January always starts off good. And then usually by the end of February, you run into pen space issues again. That's all the backgrounded cattle, the cattle the producers kept weaned, preconditioned. They start coming. Oh, we don't know where to put them. We don't know no pen space. Didn't happen again. This market is getting higher every week, and guys keep calling for these cattle. We want cattle. We want cattle. We want cattle. So we've said for years, the herd's shrinking, the herd's shrinking, the herd's shrinking. We're there now. It's rearing its head, and a lot of calves that came to town this fall, their mamas went to town too. So there's a lot of calves that we got this previous fall that we're not going to get next year. The amount of bred heifers that were out there last year and previous years with what yearlings did, guys didn't even bother turning their bulls out. They contracted those heifers as yearlings, as feeder cattle. The year before with the drought, anything we did turn out as a replacement heifer came back in June or July, got estromate and went in the feedlot. So I think that I hope we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg here. And I think that it's going to hold for a few years, because in 2015, when we saw these record high prices, what did everyone do? They bred everything. They bred every heifer. They kept every cow because like, oh, this is great. And the herd shot right back up to the numbers it was in 2 years from then. We just created our own problem again. We don't have the pasture to do that right now. We've lost so much grassland to grain farming. It has become almost unaffordable to buy land and put it back into grass, all that land that we have lost, to put it into seed, to fence it, and pay for the land price to begin with, and compete with these canola farmers. It's not coming back overnight, and it's not going to come back in a year, and it's probably not going to come back in 3 years. So if you're a cow-calf man, I think you've got some pretty good years ahead of you. I really feel that way, and I hope this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I hope next year we see some 4s at the start of some prices instead of 2s and 3s, and I really think we will. So, yeah, I'm very optimistic for the cow-calf producer going forward.
All right, well, that's a positive note. That's all the questions we had for now. If you had anything else you wanted to add?
I don't. Sorry if I'm a little short of time. I always have trouble I can't listen to myself talk for that long. So I apologize. No, thank you guys very much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor, and hope to do it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks so much. So thank you everyone for joining us, and special thanks to Alan and Kathy for sharing their knowledge with us. Our final session on emerging technologies for livestock producers will wrap up the webinar series tomorrow, and we hope you'll be joining us for that. If you have any further questions regarding order buying or prices or cost of production or other agriculture related questions or inquiries, please contact your nearest Saskatchewan Agriculture Regional Office or call the Agriculture Knowledge Center at 1-866-457-2377. Or you can also visit our website, saskatchewan.ca/agriculture. Thanks again for joining us today, and I hope you have a great afternoon.